Hey, it's Jared. Today I'm comparing the Leica Q3 and the Sony a7cR. I have them both in the Peak Design Everyday Sling. This is the 6-liter bag, and I've been carrying them around in this bag because they fit great and it's an easy bag to wear and super comfortable. So let's open up the bag and get these cameras out of here and take a look at them. So the reason that I'm making this video is because a lot of people were considering the a7cR and a similar lens to what was on the Leica Q3 as an alternative. And I thought, I wanted to check out the a7cR as well and figure out if it was a great camera option for me. So I picked one up and put the 24mm G Master lens on it, which is the closest lens that I have to a 28mm that is a prime lens. I have a 35mm, and so sometimes I tried the 35mm and the 24mm on the a7cR just to see what different experience I would get. So first of all, before I jump into this, I just want to say that yes, I know these cameras are not in the same class. They are two different types of cameras. This is a point and shoot camera essentially because it has a fixed lens. It's a very high-end point and shoot camera and it's a Leica. And this is a mirrorless camera. I can switch out the lenses, and yes, there are differences here. This is not a direct comparison of two cameras that are similar in really any way other than the fact that they're cameras and they're both higher resolution full frame cameras. So I have three kind of key areas that I'm going to identify in this video. First of all, we're going to talk image quality. Second of all, we'll talk usability. And third of all, we'll talk about practicality. So hopefully I'll remember those three things as we get through this video. So let's talk about image quality first. One of the reasons that I wanted the Q3 in the first place was because it's a Leica and because it is essentially a point and shoot. It has a fixed lens on it, a 28mm amazing lens on this camera, and it's going to force me to be creative because of the limitations of a fixed focal length to think about photography differently. And that was a challenge for me, and definitely something that I spoke about in my Leica Q3 video. So if you haven't seen that one yet, you can watch that one after this one because I share some insights and some kind of self-realizations in that video that I think could be useful to some people out there and maybe frustrating to others. I don't know. You'll have to let me know in the comments, like other people did. The Leica image is absolutely fantastic. Not only is this just a fantastic lens in the first place, this 28mm is an iconic lens, captures beautiful images. It's hard to explain because it takes a lot to get an image out of any other camera to look like this, because this camera package is perfectly designed for what it does. It doesn't have to do anything else because you're not changing out lenses. They don't have to figure out how do we make a camera that works with a wide angle lens, but then also works well if we put a long telephoto on it. This camera is designed only to work with this lens, and because of that, everything is tuned in and dialed in so well, and it produces amazing images. So obviously this lens is fantastic. This 28mm f1.7 that also has a macro mode, which is great to have that flexibility, creates a fantastic image. And the camera performs relatively well in the majority of different lighting situations that you find yourself in. But I did notice that it struggled compared to what I was used to in lower light situations. The Q3, though it has a fast lens at 1.7, still does not perform as well as a lot of Sony cameras will in the dark. It's just their processing, their sensor technology just is not designed for that. And it is a higher resolution camera, which means it's going to struggle in lower light situations because that's just the nature of a higher resolution camera. But with that aside, anytime that I pulled this camera out to shoot, as long as I had the patience to utilize this camera properly in the situation that I found myself in, I enjoyed everything about it, including the images that I was able to produce. So when I decided to add in the a7cR and go out and shoot, I was purposely going out to shoot to kind of compare the two cameras because I'd already spent several weeks with the Q3 and felt that I had a good understanding of the Q3, and also the fact that I couldn't just go out and run and gun and be as reactive as I typically would be, being that I'm a dad with 4 kids and I'm often using my cameras to shoot their sporting events and different things like that. I know that this camera isn't something that I'm going to use often when I am working on client projects and stuff like that as a professional photographer. The Q3 was primarily a purchase for me when I am out just enjoying photography in general. And so once I was more realigned with that expectation, I knew that I could get out there and try and do the same thing with the A7cR. And so I took comparison photos really just to see, am I able to get anything out of the Q3 that I could not get out of the A7cR? Being that the A7cR is a higher resolution camera, it is the compact version of the Sony a7R5, and with the added benefit of being able to switch out lenses, I tried to limit myself just to one lens. So I was either using the 24mm G Master or sometimes the 35mm G Master on this camera, and occasionally using the 24mm compact G lens. I'll make sure to link to all of that below so that you could check those particular lenses out if you're interested. So the images that I was able to get out of the A7cR were exactly what I would expect, because I've been shooting on Sony for a long time, and I have an A7 IV, I have an A1, and I had access to the A7R5 for a while and spent some time with that camera. And so the images out of this camera were exactly what I would expect, because I've been shooting with Sony for a long time. There were no surprises out of this camera other than limitations of the A7C compact line of cameras, which I'll talk about in another video, perhaps when I do a full review of the A7cR. So no real surprises out of this camera. I didn't even really need to get this camera. I could have been shooting with my A7 IV and gotten probably the same images that I've been displaying on the screen. But I do like the compact nature of this camera. It's small, and even with a lens on it like this makes it not so small, but with a smaller compact lens on it, it does make it a compact package to carry around, a lot lighter weight while still having the performance that a Sony camera has. So the images were great. Nothing to complain about out of this camera. But I did notice little differences in image quality between the Q3 and the A7cR. The Q3 produced more consistent images that were sharp from edge to edge and seem to have a specific look to them, which I think is unique to the Leica camera in and of itself. That's something that I would have to spend some time editing and finagling with my images in order to achieve with the A7cR. Not that the images out of the A7cR are not great, but if you do get close to an image and you start to pixel peep and you're really looking for things that are differences, you can tell the difference between these two cameras. The Q3 is going to produce a sharper overall image than the A7cR at a similar focal length and a similar situation with the same lighting conditions. So that is something to consider. So I can't necessarily say that the Q3 is leaps and bounds better than what I can achieve with the A7cR, but when you do get close and look at the images, you can see subtle differences here and there. So let's talk about using these two cameras. I find myself struggling more with the Q3 than I do with the A7cR. And part of that does come down to familiarity. I am definitely more familiar with a Sony camera than I am with the Leica system. However, the A7cR is different than my A1. It has less buttons on it, and it is a little bit more challenging to get around than a larger camera like the A1. So I can't necessarily say that I'm just more familiar with the Sony, because this Sony does have little differences that make it a little bit more challenging to use until you get more familiar with the overall system. But there are some things with the Q3 that I found a little bit challenging. First of all, it just doesn't have much to grip onto. Now, I did buy the wireless charging grip, which adds a grip to the front of the camera, which does make it easier to hold onto. But I found myself not wanting to use this because it covers up the battery port and the SD card slot. And so when this is attached, it covers everything up. And it's easy to remove. Yes, you can just twist this and it comes right off. That's fine. But I don't like the fact that the 1/4-20 mount is all the way over here. I tend to use these little plates on my camera so that I can mount to tripods and things like that. And with this plate on there, it pretty much covers up the ability to remove this. And so now I have two things that I need to remove. Even though maybe they could have put a bezeled edge on this side, and then this could have been a plate that just slides into things, they didn't do that with this wireless plate. And so I have to remove 2 different things to get this off, which is frustrating. And on top of that, this is not a very fast way of charging your camera. And I did not opt to buy the Leica plate that this would set on. And so balancing this on a normal like Qi wireless charger for a phone is challenging, because it seems to be this is the area right in here where the wireless charging takes place, and the camera just wants to kind of fall off of wireless chargers due to the way that the balance would be. And that's why Leica has a nice wide plate that you set the camera on, and I opted not to get that. So though this grip is nice, this becomes kind of problematic for my everyday use of the Leica Q3, thus not giving me much to grip onto. I did order the grip that goes in the hot shoe that's kind of an additional thumb grip with a little bit more to hold on to, but that has been back ordered and I have yet to be able to experience that. So considering that this is an expensive camera, I'm thinking about that a lot. I'm thinking about holding onto the camera and keeping a good grip on the camera. And if I want to be shooting like one-handed, reaching up here to hit the shutter while trying to hold the camera, I've got my pinky finger kind of wrapped around the bottom, just really trying to hold onto this camera so that I don't drop it. And that's probably not the right scenario to be using this camera if you are in high activity, you're moving around a lot and you're afraid that you might drop this camera. This is a camera that you really pause and you hold and you spend time capturing and thinking about your shot. Whether you're doing street photography and you're kind of preparing yourself for an opportunity, or you're shooting a scene or something like that, this camera is more designed, I think, and the idea behind this camera is more just to be kind of methodical and slow down with your photography and spend some time thinking about what you're capturing before just going crazy. But as a dad of 4 and just being an overall busy guy, I find myself being very reactive to what I want to capture, and this camera can become a bit challenging there. The flip out screen on the back can be kind of a pain in the butt because there's no way to flip it out from the side. You have to get your fingernails underneath it or kind of grip it and pull this out. And that can be kind of challenging and time consuming. And because it's a big screen and you're trying to hold onto the camera, you have to be methodical about that too and really slow yourself down so you don't pull and maybe you drop the camera or feel like you're going to drop the camera. I definitely felt more safe having a camera strap around my neck while using this camera, just because it's an expensive camera and it's very beautiful and it's made of metal. And the last thing that I want is dings in this metal because I dropped the camera. I'm maybe more fearful using this camera just because of that. And that slows me down in the process of using this camera. Getting access to the ports on the side, you really have to kind of dig your fingernails in there to get access to the ports. There's a USB Type-C port on here. Now, one of the things that was an initial frustration was that this camera came in a different USB transfer mode. So I plugged this into my computer and was not able to transfer files off of the camera to my computer, which led me to believe that the only way to get them off is to actually pull out the SD card. I did find that this camera does not come from the manufacturer in mass storage mode, and so you need to go into your USB settings and set the camera to mass storage. For some reason, it was set to iPhone transfer, as if most people are going to transfer via cable to their iPhone, especially when Leica has a pretty fantastic mobile app. But I found that that was kind of frustrating because the default should be connecting to a computer. Not everybody has an iPhone. And on top of that, the camera came with an iPhone cable with a Lightning adapter cable, and iPhones no longer come with a Lightning port. So for me, that was kind of a frustrating experience. But once I got it into the right USB transfer mode, it became a little bit less frustrating. I can easily transfer files even without taking the SD card out. But I don't necessarily like this port because you have to have the camera at a certain angle. And with a lot of these other cameras, there's some sort of a switch or, some sort of a door you can get access to pretty much from any angle just by using your fingernail or something. I do love how it's very sleek and there isn't anything here that doesn't need to be there, but it can be kind of a challenge to get access to that port if you're trying to do it in a hurry. The nature of this camera, as I mentioned before, is to slow down and really enjoy your photography, and that is part of the usability of this camera as well. The shutter speed is adjusted here with this knob. The ISO requires a push and then a rotation, and the aperture has to manually be adjusted on the lens. And so it's a little bit more to think about and a little bit more to process if you're somebody that shoots in full manual. But you can easily bypass some of that by essentially putting it in aperture priority mode, which would be adjusting your aperture while having your shutter in automatic, or putting your lens in automatic and then adjusting your shutter speed, which would be shutter priority. And I found that to be a little bit easier for me, less thinking and more just enjoying the moment with the camera. Now, even though I shoot with Sony predominantly, that doesn't mean that there weren't some frustrations with this camera. This camera has an articulating screen on the back, and I usually keep it closed because I can and can protect that. And so that means having to flip out the screen, flip it around and back so that I can view the screen. It also means that there is no articulation on this screen. I have to flip the screen out and then hold it out like this, which I don't like because I like to look straight down the barrel of my camera when I'm shooting. And looking over off to the side, it's just not as easy to balance a camera and keep everything. I have to go into this mode with the level to really help me make sure that everything is lined up, because it's a weird way to look off to the side here, and I don't really like that. And so there's a frustration here that I don't have on the Leica, because I do prefer to have a screen that articulates up like this. So a little bit of a frustration there, but nonetheless, that's just a limitation of this camera. The other thing is the EVF on the Sony. It is really small, and looking through this little tiny EVF, it is really tiny, and I have to say it's not as good of an experience as the Leica. The Leica has a little bit bigger of an EVF, and when I look through it, things just look a little bit clear, and the image looks larger in the EVF on the Leica. And so I do like that a little bit better. And so when I look through the Sony's EVF, it's just, I kind of have to like look around to see all the edges. And part of that may be because I wear glasses and I can't necessarily get my eye as close as other people could to it. But on the Leica, I don't struggle to see all four corners of the EVF. And using the camera with the EVF is definitely a lot nicer on the Leica than it is on the A7cR because of how small that EVF is. Now, any of the other frustrations that I probably have with the usability of the A7cR are more in line with limitations of this body design and button configuration in comparison to my other experiences with the Sony. I like the fact that there are more buttons on this camera than there are on the Leica. And the Leica, I find myself having to go into the menu and tap and do different things on the back of the display that I don't have to do on the Sony, because the Sony has the additional buttons. And I'm definitely more used to this configuration and layout than with the Leica. The Leica is designed to be less of a distraction. Just get your settings and go out and shoot, and not a bunch of buttons to get in your way. Now, shooting video on the Leica can be a little bit more frustrating as well, because it doesn't remember your settings for photography and video. When you set your settings for photography and then switch over into video mode, you're gonna have the same settings, and you have to change those settings for video. And then when you go back over to photo mode, you then have to change your settings again. That's time consuming and kind of frustrating. But I don't think that the Q3 was really designed for video. Though it has some pretty impressive video specs, it's not that great as a video camera. It doesn't have any microphone input at all, and that doesn't necessarily match the impressive specs that this camera has. The fact that this camera can shoot up to 8K video is pretty impressive, but with no ability to connect any sort of a microphone to it, why would you shoot 8K and not have great audio? I mean, it does an okay job with its internal microphones, but not only is 8K not really necessary in the first place, so I feel like the inclusion of 8K was really just to say, hey, we can shoot video too, but without there being any sort of a microphone that you can attach to this camera, it leaves you lacking as a video capture camera. Whereas with the A7cR, we have a microphone jack here for recording, and we also have one here for monitoring. And so this camera, even though it can't shoot 8K, it can shoot 4K, and it does a great job at that and is a little bit more nimble as a video camera. And then add on the fact that you can enable a feature that allows you to have separate settings for photo and video, so that when you use this lever here, which in my opinion is easier just to flip this lever than it is on the Q3, which sometimes you can accidentally hit this button because you're trying to grip this camera so hard. And because of this button placement, you're switching between modes, maybe on accident, and unintentionally being in a mode that you weren't prepared to be in. I don't know. I think that it's great that the Q3 has video features, and I would prefer it to have features than not, but it's lacking in that respect. And so if video is of any importance to you, the Q3 It's great that it has video, but it's not the best at shooting video. The Sony also doesn't require you to go into video mode. Even if you're in photo mode, you can still hit the video shutter button and it will go into video mode temporarily and shoot video. So let's talk about the practicality of these cameras. The Leica Q3 is like driving around a sports car. It's absolutely fun. It is an experience. It's comfortable. It is perhaps better in certain ways, but it's not as practical of a camera as the A7cR is, because this camera can do pretty much anything and can be adapted to do pretty much anything. But there's something to be said about a performance machine like the Q3. It is built to do exactly what it's built to do and nothing else. It's built with this 28mm lens attached to it. It's built with a full frame sensor that is matched and set up to work with this lens, and it doesn't have to work with anything else because this lens cannot be removed from the camera. And the rest of the body and everything else that's thought about on this camera is minimalized to not be a distraction and to get out of your way so that you can just shoot. But that also means being in a mindset and being ready to accept the limitations that this camera has. Though it has limitations, that's not a negative mark against the Q3. The Q3 does what it does exceptionally well and better than any other camera that you can get and try to make like the Q3. You cannot make the A7cR like the Q3. You can make it close. You can get a lens that's near this. You can change things about the camera to make it kind of feel more like the Leica, but you cannot make it the Leica Q3, because this camera doesn't have to do anything other than be exactly what it is. And that is probably the main difference between these two. Now, you definitely need to go and watch my Q3 video, because I do talk a lot about our expectations of what we put on a camera. A lot of times we think a camera is going to fix our problems if we just have that camera or that lens or that combination of the two. And if you've been shooting for a while like I have with different cameras, the idea of a camera that you can't change, that you can't adapt, that you can't make do anything else other than what it is, sounds appealing, because it does force us to be more creative and more methodical with the images that we capture. And that is the beauty in something like the Q3 that you're not going to be able to replicate in another camera. As much as I want to have just one lens on this camera and it be like a point and shoot, it's not going to ever be that, because I can take this lens off and I could put this 24-105 lens on it and shoot my son's basketball game, which is exactly what I did. I can change the lens on this camera, which essentially makes it no different than any other camera that I have. And so there's something to be said about the limitations that come from the Q3, but the beauty in those limitations is that it forces you to get outside of the normal and use the camera for what it is. An amazing machine that captures fantastic images that are unique because they have that Leica look to them. And not only are the images unique, but the camera in and of itself is unique as well. And sometimes the tool in our hands gives us a certain feeling and invokes certain creativity as well. So what do I recommend? It's hard for me to say, because the Leica Q3 provides a unique and special experience if you have time and consideration for that experience. If you try to treat this camera like you would any other camera in a more run and gun, capture what's going on around me type of environment, you're not going to enjoy the Q3. And you're going to wish that you had something with more flexibility. But if you have the time to slow down and experience photography for what it is, and slow down the world around you so that you can think about your images and be more connected with what you're trying to capture, the Leica Q3 is an unbeatable experience. And to be completely honest, it might come down to you just having to try it for yourself. So I've got links down in the description below to the Q3, to the A7cR, and some other lenses and accessories that I use. Be sure to check out those links and give them a click so that you can support the channel. But that's going to do it for this video. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. Also, make sure to check out the link to the Shutter Society newsletter. This is a new newsletter that I'm putting out where I share tips and experiences of mine in photography, as well as news and other things that I find interesting that I've pulled together into a unique newsletter that I think you'll find interesting. Thanks for checking that out, and we'll see you back in the next video.